Carleton, Mississippi Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am here today to speak to Bill 45, the Making Healthier Choices Act of 2014. Schedule 1, Healthy Menu Choices Act 2014. Schedule 1, Section 1 specifies that a regulated food service premise is not only a food service premise that is part of a chain of food service premises, but also any other food service premise that may be provided for in the regulations. Adding new classes of businesses through regulation versus legislation concerns me, as I know that there are many mom-and-pop restaurants, particularly in small towns and in rural Ontario, that would not be able to afford to undertake the testing requirements to label the calories of all the food they serve. Before expanding the class of food premises to which the labeling requirements apply, the legislation should come back to this chamber for debate. As it is currently drafted, regulations under Bill 45 could potentially capture all so-called fast food premises and disadvantage small business owners who do not have the economies of scale that, say, a Tim Hortons or a Burger King does. Increased regulatory requirements do not impact all businesses in the same way. Small businesses do not have the same capacity to respond the way that large corporate entities do. They do not have the ability to spread their costs across many operations. And given that small businesses account for a large number of jobs in Ontario, we need to be careful that we do not regulate our job creators out of business. It is curious to me that on one hand, we have agencies and ministries whose mandate it is to help businesses thrive and grow in Ontario, while other ministries regulating small companies are regulating small companies out of business. So again, I reiterate, the job of this House is to legislate. Regulations are a poor substitute for legislation, especially when the potential impacts are unknown and unknowable. Our job as legislators is to debate in an open and transparent way the merits of a proposed legislation prior to a final decision being made on a bill. We are responsible for making major decisions that impact all Ontarians, and therefore should not delegate our legislative authority to bureaucrats. If the provincial government decides in the future to expand the class of regulated food premises, they should bring this issue back to the House for a full and open debate. Schedule 3, Electronic Cigarettes Act of 2014. This afternoon, or was last week, I met with Denise Smith, Denise DeCampos, and Kirsten Young from the Heart and Stroke Foundation. They explained to me that researchers and public health experts are concerned that emerging research shows that e-cigarettes have the potential to re-normalize smoking and undermine tobacco control and smoking cessation efforts. In addition, there is a potential for e-cigarettes to be a gateway to tobacco use and nicotine addiction, and that marketing e-cigarettes is targeted to youth with the addition of candy and fruit flavors. Their presentation was thorough and very convincing and confirmed my existing support for the restrictions on e-cigarettes identified in Bill 45. Our office has received much correspondence in support of e-cigarettes and their value in quitting smoking. However, the scientific research is currently unclear as to the long-term health impacts as well as the effectiveness of e-cigarettes as a cessation device. That the tobacco industry is investing heavily in e-cigarettes causes me concern that nicotine addiction rather than harm reduction may be the goal of e-cigarette manufacturers. The issue is that those who do not smoke tobacco cigarettes but have started smoking e-cigarettes could potentially form a lifelong addiction to nicotine. Sales of e-cigarettes are estimated to reach approximately $3 billion worldwide by 2015. And although precise usage is difficult to estimate, a number of research studies identify that e-cigarette users include children, youth, current smokers, and non-smokers in Canada. 3% of adults are current users, 8% have tried e-cigarettes, 16% of young adults had used e-cigarettes in the past, 18% of Quebec non-tobacco smoking high school students had tried e-cigarettes, and 31% were interested in trying them. Given that those numbers will likely continue to increase into the foreseeable future, a cautious approach is needed. Similar to contraband cigarettes, we do not know what specific ingredients in what specific amounts are included in e-cigarettes, given the lack of safety requirements regarding product development, ingredient disclosure, information of nicotine levels, and risk of use. Contraband tobacco products. Given the increasing number of illegal smoke shacks popping up across Ontario and the uncertain quality of the products being sold at them, it seems to me that the provincial government resources would be better invested in shutting them down rather than imposing increasing restrictions on law-abiding retailers. The Ontario Korean Businessmen Association estimates that 5% of current tobacco users purchase menthol cigarettes. Banning flavoured tobacco products, including menthol cigarettes, will not necessarily have the intended effect. Instead of reducing smoking levels, these bans will likely decrease the revenue of law-abiding retailers, reduce overall tax revenue from the sale of legal tobacco products, and open up new markets for contraband cigarette manufacturers. Contraband smokers are a large and growing problem in Ontario, particularly when it comes to the contribution to underage smoking. Remember, law-abiding retailers are required to not sell cigarettes to people under the age of 19 years old and seek the identification of cigarette purchasers who merely look under the age of 25 years old. Whereas we know that illegal cigarette sellers are willing to sell cigarettes to children of all ages. In addition, we do not know what ingredients are being used in the making of contraband cigarettes. There could potentially be, and likely are, ingredients in contraband cigarettes that are far worse than what is included in regulated tobacco products, as bad as we know they are. Closing down illegal smoke shacks prior to implementing a ban on these illegal products is critical so that we do not facilitate the establishment of new and expanded markets for contraband tobacco manufacturers and retailers. As we have witnessed, once illegal smoke shacks are established and are allowed to flourish, they become increasingly difficult to eradicate from our communities. Similarly, we can predict with some certainty that if contraband cigarette manufacturers and retailers expand their operations to include menthol and flavoured tobacco products, they will eventually target children, thus potentially contributing to the very situation, underage smoking, that this legislation is meant to curtail. Currently, illegal cigarettes, which are cheaper, easier to purchase, and likely more deadly than regulated tobacco products, are the biggest threat to our children. The problem is the policing policy of the provincial government. The provincial government is letting the fear of making a mistake dictate its policing policy when it comes to the illegal smoke shacks. The provincial government should not let fear dictate law and order policies in Ontario. Fear leads to the breakdown in law and order. Fear led to the breakdown in law and order in Caledonia, with catastrophic results for a number of families. Now, fear is dictating policing policy when it comes to the manufacture and safe contraband and sale of contraband tobacco products, with potentially catastrophic results for our children. If we care about our kids, shutting down the manufacture and sale of contraband tobacco products should be the provincial government's #1 priority. Marketing to kids. Bill 45 mandates that the calorie content be labelled for standard food items in fast food chain restaurants. To date, calorie labelling has had mixed results on reducing obesity, particularly childhood obesity. On the other hand, it is no secret that advertisers target children and that, as most parents know, marketing strongly influences children's preferences, requests, and consumption. Just this afternoon, or last week, Denise and Kirsten from the Heart and Stroke Foundation were explaining to me that food and drink advertising is associated with childhood obesity. That Canadian children's exposure to advertising is amongst the worst in the world, nearly 6 times per hour, and that the advertising of nutritionally vacant food to children is a key obstacle to improving the health outcomes of Canada's children. Foods containing lots of sugar, fat, and salt appeal to our taste buds, but not necessarily our waistlines. Children generally live for the moment, are more easily influenced, and do not necessarily understand the long-term consequences of the choices they make today. Being bombarded with thousands of commercials a year does not generally improve their decision-making processes. To that end, the Heart and Stroke Foundation is requesting that commercial marketing of all foods and beverages to children be restricted. In their fact sheet, the Heart and Stroke Foundation identifies that Quebec has had legislation in place since 1980, and fast food expenditures in the province have dropped by 13%. Quebec snack consumption rates are the lowest in the country, and that a 2011 Ipsos Reid poll found that 82% of Canadians support this restriction. It is certainly something to think about. What I found very distressing when reading their literature was the statistic that the average time children and youth spend in front of a screen, including computers, tablets, phones, and televisions, is 7 hours and 48 minutes per day. This statistic goes a long way to explaining the rising rate of childhood obesity. To say that our culture has changed since I was a child is an understatement. I couldn't wait to get outdoors every day and spend as little time as possible indoors. So although I understand that overconsumption plays a role in obesity, we will not solve the obesity problem by only addressing consumption. It is not enough. We must also address the increasingly sedentary lifestyle many school-age children are currently leading. Certainly, schools can and should play a role in promoting physical activity, or at the very least removing barriers such as onerous restrictions on children's games and playtime. We should let kids be kids. Allowing kids to play freely is the surest path to kids engaging in physical activity. Kids play, including playing tag, climbing trees, and any number of other activities that kids have always enjoyed doing, is either being banned outright at schools, or it is so restricted the fun is sucked out of it. I understand that these restrictions are well-intentioned and meant to keep kids safe from injury, but they have the potential consequence of making kids fat. Yes, kids often make mistakes. That is how they learn life lessons and avoid making bigger mistakes in the future. Kids do not learn by only ever being allowed to engage in perfectly safe behavior. We must examine the relationship between risk and reward, with the understanding that we cannot completely eliminate risk in children's lives, and that overprotecting our kids rather than equipping them with knowledge has profound consequences for their future health, which we are now witnessing. I am a farmer. Farming can be a dangerous business. While risk can be mitigated, it cannot be eliminated entirely in day-to-day farming. For me, the rewards far outweigh the risks. If farmers such as myself decided to only engage in practices that did not entail some level of risk, if we did not balance the risks and rewards, there would be far less food to eat. I believe that it is time to reverse the trend of continually restricting children's play activities. Encouraging children's play, both indoors and out, is the surest way to a healthier future for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions and comments? The member for Nickel Belt.
Thank you. And it was interesting listening to the member